So Jeff, very excited to have you on. I think everyone knows you as an industry vet, but also W&W, your business, a very well-respected um, glazing contractor in the industry. And really what I want to dig into in this discussion and podcast is some of the projects that you guys take on, because I know you are very much so pushed to the limit in terms of capabilities and what you're asked to do. So before we even get into that technical talk, maybe you could give a little bit of a brief introduction and your family history and where you guys are out of.
Sure, that'll only take up half our time here. So we're an employee-owned, family-managed company now. I've been here for 35 years, which is very painful to admit to. I used to have hair like you when I started.
It's quickly going great.
Well, at least you have some. My brothers and I and my cousin run the business, and we bought it from my father and my uncle back in 2004. So 20 years ago, we made the decision to go deep into the glass business for the rest of our careers. We all started working, in high school during the summers, driving trucks, sweeping the warehouse, loading, whatever, cutting glass and metal, installing on job sites all throughout the summers while we were in college. We all got college degrees and finally were able to graduate from our field work. The company originally was started by my father and uncle in the late 1970s. And that grew out of a company that my grandfather had started. He passed away at a very early age, and a public company had done a roll up and bought up a bunch of glass and glazing businesses. And long story short, my father and my uncle extricated themselves from that, wanted to do their own thing, and literally started with a 250 square foot little piece of an airplane hangar is where the office was, with one employee and my uncle. And just grew from there, and grew from 500 grand the first year in total revenue doing installation services in 1977 to we do well over 200 million a year now. So have 200 employees, still out of the one location right across the street from where we started.
Well, and I think it's important to preface that you guys are primarily New York based, but supply work all over the country.
Yeah, so New York is still 75% of our revenue stream, always has been, but we've always been in the highly engineered structural glass business around the United States since the very beginning. We used to be the largest distributor of structural glass racquetball and squash courts starting in the 1970s. And I think they did maybe 9,000 installations around the US between 1977 and 1998, when we finally gave up that business. Our big structural glass business just became too big to manage the racquetball courts. They were all onesie twosie type jobs, but it gave us a lot of insight on how to handle heavy tempered structural glass, 3/4 inch fins, 1/2 inch face glass. Falconer Glass up in upstate New York, who's no longer around. They were bought by Guardian and then they got shut down. Used to fabricate that product for us. Then it switched over to Viricon, and then we just got too busy and we really didn't have a solid core of fabricators here to deal with it, and it just became too much to manage. And we try to stick to what we do best. So we couldn't have distractions of all these little specialty little glass products that we used to have, a railing company and all kinds of other things. My uncle was a real dabbler, but my father really saw the path forward into the big, high-rise commercial architectural glass and metal business in New York City being as our future. And, as an adjunct to that, Pilkington came to us in 1993 and asked us to take on the distributorship, I should say, of the Pilkington planar system throughout North America. We had our own competing system, and we decided it was better off to go with them. And that thing just exploded, and we did like 4,000 jobs over 20 some odd years, 25 years, until 28 years actually. And then after COVID, they decided to get out of that business and shut down their downstream operations, closed the factory, let everybody go, sold off all the equipment, and the planar system is no more. So it kind of gave us an opportunity to really springboard our business into being able to offer a bigger palette of products in the architectural engineered glass systems where we're not hamstrung anymore by staying within Pilkington's little guidelines. So it really opened us up to do a lot more work, and we were always doing higher end architectural glass and metals type things in New York anyway. If it wasn't a bolted glass, it was some other type of piece of steel or a high span or a cable wall or whatever. So we have a really varied group of people here. Lots of engineers, draftspeople, try to keep everything in-house as much as possible and try to offer a product that really differentiates ourselves from everybody else in the marketplace in the New York area, because we have that depth of knowledge of engineering, of installation, and we don't make anything. That's really, I think, what separates us from everybody else is we're able to partner with the highest quality fabricators, whether it be metal, glass, metal panels, what have you, and integrate those products so that we're product agnostic. Designer, developer wants XYZ product. We're happy to bring that to them and find the highest quality fabricator of that genre for them. So it really allows us a lot more flexibility than we used to have.
Yeah, I mean, I worked on a hybrid curtain wall project with you that you supplied out of Canada. So that's kind of speaks to the diversification of products that you can offer. But what is the, and you're going to say there is no typical process, but what is the typical process of when somebody brings you in? Do they usually have a system in mind? Or are they bringing you in as the glazing contractor to recommend? And how does that look?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times we're brought in at the conceptual level, during schematic design. And whether if it's a developer, they'll bring us in mostly because they're interested in how much it costs. Construction manager, they want to know how much it costs and how long is it going to take and what are the logistics. Architect end is more about, hey, what can we do? Can we do this? And here's our dream. Here's a cocktail napkin sketch. And I mean, one of the most interesting jobs we did here in New York in the late 90s was the Hayden Planetarium at the Rose Center for Earth and Space, American Museum of Natural History. And that job is a glass box that's 100 feet tall, 100 feet wide on three sides. And at the time, ENIAD is the architect. It used to be called Polshek Partners, and Jim Polshek literally had a hand sketch of a sphere inside of a cube. And that's how that job started. And they brought us in there and they showed us a couple of, hand drawings and sketches and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And we were like, "Yeah, this is going to be amazing." And it began a multi-year process of, design assistance. That was before a design assist was really a thing. It was more free-con. Well, we still do free-con, but it was more like, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And here's some onion skin traces." And so it all depends on who brings us in, whether it's the developer, the architect, construction manager. Sometimes a vendor will bring us in and say they've been contacted by a particular customer and they'd like us to partner with them. So we like to have an open approach, and there's definitely no size fits all, as you know, working in this market,
Well,
and that's
when
no
you're
different than every market.
Well, so before we dive into that, I was also going to ask you what was the push to diversify out of New York? Was it just to mitigate risk and have a bigger, reach, or were you seeing trends where people were bringing you into other markets?
So I wish I could say we were clever enough to say, here's our business plan and we're going to diversify our offering and not be stuck in any one market. It sort of just grew organically, where we had some jobs in some different places and we made a lot of friends because we wouldn't go into another city and install and step on other people's toes. We would always want to partner with a company who works like ours, who has a good attention to detail, who has an excellent field crew and the right equipment so that they can handle a job. Because what am I going to bring to go into Dallas, Texas and install a job myself? So it's just one of those things where as we began to partner with other glaciers like us in different cities, we had friends and those friends would call us and say, "Hey, I have another job and we'd like to do this." And that developer saw this, or I have a regular customer. And one thing led to another. And in cities like at the time, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, Boston, Washington, even Chicago, we were doing, 3, 4 jobs a year in every one of those cities. And we were killing it. It was great. And I think like anything else, it became a profit center and it became a viable business to stand on its own. And we had a team, we had some estimators, project managers, engineers, draftspeople, and now we had to keep the machine fed. And, it becomes a self-fulfilling, problem if you don't feed it. So for us, we started to have architectural reps and we were dealing with architects and developers who were based in New York and they were building buildings in other cities. And then they would partner with another developer and co-develop a project. And then that developer would be our customer and that would lead to more work. So it really began organically and it took a long time to develop the tentacles that we have in a lot of cities around the country. But we were very fortunate to not go into doing something we shouldn't do. For instance, we would never go do a curtain wall job or a window wall job in a foreign city. Weren't invited. Nobody wants us there. We weren't going to be the next Flower City or Glassaloom and just start, or Perma at the time, it's starting to grow and just start dropping, seeds in all these places and wanting to be $1 billion company. We've seen too many companies do that and not do it well. To me, without mentioning names, there's a family business who's no longer in business anymore, and they opened up a whole bunch of offices in the 2000s, and they got stuck not getting paid and had a problem, and it just, a lot of people lost their job, and it was very painful for a lot of people. We're friends with some of those people who now run other companies, and I think we learned what not to do. So you also got to be a little lucky.
Well, so if you were being requested to supply product in a different city, I'm guessing it was a somewhat specialty or proprietary type project, and it's not like you had to go in and win over some random glazer in Houston who had no interest in working with you. It was like the project team was set, the president was, this is the product, and then
Right.
you were married with whoever was the local guy.
That's correct. And early on, we had a super close relationship. Not that we don't now, but we were much more vertically integrated with companies like Viracon, and they were the dominant force in the United States for decades, right? I mean, they owned the architectural glass market. So we were partnering with them. They were fabbing product for us and for Pilkington when the overflow got big. And they used to make a lot of other things for us. They actually used to have a big glass door division, believe it or not. So we used to get glass doors from them too. They had the California plant. They had a lot of different things. So it really helped drive. We had a lot of the same architectural reps in various cities. So we had a really good relationship with those folks. And then, as their niche started to change and the Europeans started to come to the United States and figure out how to ship, 40-foot open top containers with high-end architectural glass, the market kind of fragmented. And the truth is the market also got super big, and Viracon couldn't satisfy all the demand that was out there. And the glass started getting bigger and thicker and heavier, and you had to really be set up to make those kinds of products. And for us, those European fabricators really played to our strengths. And price point, listen, money talks, and people need prices are sensitive in the market that we operate in, and you can't just ratchet up the numbers like that. So we had to find some more ways to be creative, and it really, working in the various markets around the country, taught us a lot about how other people view the industry, that we're not just in the New York bubble. I used to get off a plane in LA, get picked up, and we'd go to a meeting, and my rep would look at me and go, "Don't talk for the first hour." And I was like, "Why?" He's like, "It's too much New York.
We're not in New York. Yeah.
You got to chill."
Well,
so you learn these things as you go around.
When you're in New York, I'll have sometimes in Minneapolis, they'll say, does it get really expensive if I have more than 4 window types? And I was like, find a job in New York without less than 400 window types. And they ask why, and I don't know if it's price point or the answer is the architects want it and somebody's willing to do it. But what is the big difference you notice in the New York market versus elsewhere?
I think that I feel that the architects have a lot more freedom to be creative, and developers are trying to deliver a product that differentiates itself from the building next door, and they know that if it's class A and A plus and A plus plus, they can charge X more per square foot for it. And they hire the Starchitect, and the Starchitect, became a really popular thing in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And, the folks that would show up in their capes and their cloaks from Europe and command, extravagant fees and drive the price up on certain jobs. We loved it because it gave us an opportunity to spread our wings and do some things, be really innovative. And we would partner with engineers from Europe and who had done unique style facades in Germany and some of the other places, and London became a hotbed for these new systems. So I think that the New York developers they had clients, they had Fortune 500 companies and other tenants that really wanted to have something new and different and cutting edge. And I think like everything else, technology improves, manufacturing styles improve, glass products, energy efficiencies, coatings, electrochromics, building codes change. So there's always a driver that's pushing the market towards something. Sometimes it's design, sometimes it's price, sometimes it's lead time or product availability. I mean, we all went through the point where you couldn't get aluminum. It was like crazy. So there's a lot of different drivers that will push a market. For us, we gave up trying to figure out why architects do what they do. They're a lot more creative than we are, and we love them. But yes, sir. What can we give? What can we give you?
Yeah, you're an engineer, so stay in your seat.
Right.
Well, so have you found that the performance and the design criteria and the aesthetics are more demanding than, call it, most markets in New York. Yet, as of late, even COVID and after COVID, price pressure is prevalent more than ever. So, have you found that's driven people to want to go overseas or find lower cost options?
For sure. It's interesting because budgets are always tight no matter what job you're on. There's never enough money to do what somebody wants. And there's always somebody around the corner who's going to help drive that price down. However, I will tell you that, facade prices are up. They're up dramatically over where they used to be pre-pandemic. Those prices are never coming back. And I think that what the developers have done and the construction managers have done who have a bigger network of people resources to go to is they've brought in people from around the globe to bid on work. And that has driven the price of some projects to a pretty aggressive level where the prices, they use that as a driver to go down. But, with that comes the inherent risk of, are they capable of actually fulfilling the contract? Can they get the product made? Can they get it shipped? Can they do it on time? Do they have the logistics and the people to install it, the crews? So there's a lot of things that have gone on in the marketplace that are kind of counteracting the raw material and fabrication cost increases that everybody has seen. And I think, the love affair with Chinese material for a while was a big driver in the market. That's been tempered. I think Trump kind of putting his tariffs on certain products really, made that more difficult. And then COVID made that even more difficult where you couldn't get shipping containers and the freight was, 30,000 a load to get here. So, I mean, there were a lot of reasons not to do that. We try to avoid, we're not a Me Too and we're not a commodity guy, and we're never going to be, if I bid a job on day one and I'm the absolute cheapest, I probably made a mistake. I like to think that we're the best, but we're not perfect, but we try to bring value to the client, but we also have overhead to pay, and we got to make a little bit of money and got to pay the government. So I mean, you can't do it for free. And there's a lot of risk in this industry, tremendous amount of risk. And that's the thing I think that most of the foreign competitors that come here don't appreciate until it's too late. So there's always some job, I'm sure you've seen it many times, where someone from out of town or out of the country comes in, takes a job at a stupid number because they didn't know any better. You see them a year later, oh man, that was a terrible job. I lost my butt on that job. And yeah, because you didn't know. And so there's always that to counter as well. So, you have to bid enough work and have enough good customers and deliver a high level of service so that the client will realize that there's value in working with you. And that's really what we try to strive for.
Well, when I go, let's put Florida aside where you have hurricane requirements, and then maybe a Boston or Canada side where triple glazing is the norm. You go elsewhere, a 1-inch IGU is standard. Maybe sometimes they don't even want argon in the cavity.
Right.
And then you go to Europe and triple glazing is the standard. But in New York, obviously most projects you face, you're probably going to need laminated glass at some point for acoustic requirements per code, not
Sure.
that the developers are electing for it, and now bird friendly. So couple all these things between acoustics, thermal, bird friendly, and then the span of IGUs that you would deal with on a typical project. At some point, there are just, call it, you're dwindling down to maybe 1 or 2 fabricators domestically that can even fulfill the job. So that must have forced you to look at overseas glass fabricators.
Absolutely. I mean, all of those things, the energy code change, I mean, has really been a big driver. It used to be a double silver coating was a luxury, right? I mean, that was like, oh my God, I'm getting a double silver. Now, you can't even bid a job with a double silver. It's crazy. Something, it's 2 coatings. It's a triple silver, and then you've got like a room side low E or a cheap low E on the number 5 surface of an IGU of a triple glaze unit. And the double laminated IGUs are a big thing, both for span, for load, for impact, for acoustics, all those things. So yeah, it forces you to reevaluate your vendor network, and it really forces you to do some deep diving into the fabricators you're working with and make sure that they can make what you need at a very high level of quality and repetition and within a reasonable lead time. So, we have partners that we'll work with in Europe that will do inspections for us, and they'll go in and they'll verify factories, and we're a real stickler for tolerances and quality control. And we want to see your manuals. We want to see the reports, and we check the logs, and we want to know, has the glass been measured, and is it all within tolerance? Has it been scanned for anisotropy? Have we measured roller wave? all that kind of stuff. We want to make sure that the product that we're uncrating in the middle of Manhattan is what it's supposed to be, because if it's not at that point, it's way too late. And the cost to fix that is enormous. So we'd rather spend a little bit of money up front and a little bit extra time to have it go well at the back end. So those are things that we do, over the last 5 to 7 to 10 years that we used to not have to do, that we took for granted.
It's funny. That's
and
exactly
now
what
we
I
have to
wanted
do
to
it.
ask you. Exactly what I wanted to ask you about how because once you receive the glass, it's too late, and you have ASTM norms in terms of blemishes or scratch sizes that are not acceptable. But at the end of the day, an architect or a facade consultant might turn to a spec, but an owner might say, "I don't want that. Get rid of it." And
Right.
so, without naming names or saying a specific project, do you have a good story or something maybe 5 or 10 years ago that where you guys got bit and then that made you change your mind and realize we got to spend this money up front to do our due diligence and mitigate the downside risk?
Yeah, being in the heavy tempered glass business, as we have been for so many decades, we've seen the horror stories of nickel sulfide inclusions in poorly manufactured float glass, because that's really where it comes from. It's just a batch of glass was made at a particular, float glass supplier, raw glass maker, and their quality control was not what it should have been, and contaminants were in there, and you got a load that had nickel sulfide, and we'd have a client who would say, "I'm going to take my 50 cents a square foot deduct for heat soaking and take it out." And we were like, "Why?" And they're like, "Because it's 50 cents a square foot." And we're like, "Okay, here's a." So we said, "Okay." So let's say we did an airport terminal somewhere, and all of a sudden there was breaks starting to happen, and we were getting calls, broken glass, broken glass. What's going on here? And we'd go down and we'd look at it, and we'd see the same, cat's eyes pattern at the break origin. And we were like, got a hold of one of the experts from Pilkington Glass, who's now retired. And I'm going back a long. I was a kid when this happened, and they were like, "Yeah, it's nickel sulfide." We were like, "What do you mean nickel sulfide?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's a contaminant. It's a product. It's inherent in the glass." I'm like, "Oh, so it's defective?" And they're like, "No, it's not a defect. It's actually a property of raw glass that can happen." I'm like, "Oh, great." So they developed a heat soak testing regimen. Some people called it a statistical heat soak, where they take, 10 or 15 or 20% of the glass, and they would heat soak that glass. And if they didn't get any breakage, they would felt that they were good. And that was a statistical heat soak, because it was a lot cheaper and faster and easier to do. But if you got some and it slipped through, you had a big problem. And, after having problems on several jobs, we made a company policy that if we were going to sell 3/8 tempered glass or thicker, it would be heat soaked or we wouldn't buy it. And it would be 100% heat soaked. And then Pilkington Architectural developed a process to heat soak using a gas heat soak oven, where they would take a standard that was in Europe and they enhanced it. And it was a 2-hour heat up, an 8-hour dwell, and a 2-hour cool down. So it was a lengthy process, but they would guarantee us 99.99% of no nickel sulfide, to the point where they would warranty if there was a nickel sulfide break, they would replace it. And, I would say maybe we had 5 in a couple of million square feet of glass. So it was worth every cent that we ever spent on it. And we try to make sure we work with and now it's more of a, it's more the norm on heavy glass that, especially if there's a facade consultant involved, they know. And in all honesty, the glass that we hear that comes out of certain places in Eastern Europe, or the glass that comes out of China, is much more inherent due to their raw materials that they put in there to have nickel sulfide inclusions or silica sulfate or a few other things that will cause spontaneous breakage. So you got to be very careful where you buy that glass from. The thicker the glass, the more likely you're going to get that inclusion, because there's so much, it's exponentially more cubed area of surface to trap that inclusion in that glass. So if you're using, 1/4 inch glass versus 3/4 inch glass, it's not just 3 times the amount of glass. So it's one of those things where the scientists have spent a lot of time studying that, and that's just one defect. So there are things that have happened in the past. Gray silicone, when it first came out, was a huge fad. And there's a very big fabricator here who had a very big problem with that. And, we had one of the first jobs that has a 60-story building, that the client called us and says, "Hey, on my south elevation, glass looks like it's dripping." Dripping. Go and look at it. Holy shit, you see the spider web casting down of the ceiling. So certain things can avoid, certain things you can't avoid because it happened at the raw material end, or maybe it was a product defect, or somebody didn't put a UV stabilizer into a particular laminate that we might have used back in the day, and the glass turned brown, and you had to replace it all. So we learned a lot of what not to do and what to avoid by digging deep and working with those high quality fabricators. And sometimes, developers and owners, I get it. They're trying to be as economical as they can, but you can't cut off your nose to spite your face in this business. Because if you try to save 5 cents going in, it's going to cost you $10 going out.
So you're spending that money for your own sake, but do you find other members of the team, whether it's the design team, GC, have buy-in and involvement during that process? Or is
Yeah,
it
I do. It's mixed. It depends on the work that you're doing. We're fortunate. We do a lot of high-end work. We do a lot of work at certain museums. We've been working at certain museums for 25 years straight, and they have a whole different layer of quality control and a whole different set of parameters. It's priced accordingly, but those are the vendors that have been pre-approved, and everything is tested. And so there's that layer. I always, there's a couple of fabricators we work with, and I'm like, guys, this is a museum job, but this commercial project, this is not a museum job. They're not going to pay museum prices. It doesn't mean we're going to give them less quality. It just means that we have to accommodate the design for the price that they're willing to spend. So we occupy a certain place in the marketplace where we're not working on, CVS storefronts. It's just the reality. We're not going to do what Dwayne Reed. But, so that level of glazing contractor and the vendors that they use, they mass produce products, and they're perfectly fine, but they may not be the most thermally broken or the most energy efficient or the highest quality U value silver coating on the glass, et cetera, depending on what those products are. So we try to stay at a higher level and work with better developers, better architects. It also brings along the more complex facade consultant, which adds a whole nother layer of complexity to our business. It forces us to be at our best and to bring our A game every day. But sometimes you have to find that balance between what's reasonable and what's unrealistic and someone's gonna pay for and what they can wait for. So trying to manage all those different expectations is a whole nother thing that we have to do, and why we don't get involved in certain kinds of projects where it's just commodity driven and it's going to be super cheap and no one cares. That's not us.
What is the a lot of what I was familiar with in terms of your portfolio of work was new construction, but obviously you just finished the Penn Reclad. What were some of the pain points or learning points you're getting into when tackling existing buildings? I know people talk about it a lot, but you had, I'm imagining, an incredible amount of eyes and scrutiny on that project.
Oh yeah. So, when that job started, we were finishing 1271 Avenue of the Americas, which is a Rockefeller Center era building. That was a total reclad, 60 some odd stories. Just a tremendous, a full city block, diagonally across from Radio City Music Hall. So the logistics of that job were such that they were removing the facade a couple of floors above where we were working. So that facade replacement had its own kind of complexities to it. When we were getting involved with 2 Penn and an overclad of that building, they decided that because they had tenants that were still in the building, they couldn't just shut it down and rip off the skin. So that wasn't going to happen. So we literally had to install the new facade over the old facade, and then they removed the old facade from the inside. Much more time consuming, much more complicated. It really took us to a whole nother level of diligence and logistics and double height rigs and working multiple elevations and taking deliveries at odd times and huge lights of glass, 10 by 30 units and triple glazed facade and all kinds of things, and a challenging client, very demanding, at Vornado, and they're a great customer because they demand a certain level of quality, and they're building Class A buildings, and they want it to be a certain way, and they hire the best architects and engineers and contractors. But there's a lot of pressure, right? And trying to do that work while COVID was going on, and deal with all the logistics of working around Madison Square Garden and working on Broadway and dealing with all the ins and outs that happen with unloading and loading for different shows and sporting events that are going in around there. Plus, the major tenants are still coming in and out of the building. It was a really, really in-depth deep dive into a facade reclad. So, I mean, we've probably done 10 major building reclads over the last 10, 12 years. Not one of them is the same. It's like, but now, now we know we consider ourselves to be experts at it. And there's a certain crews that we have that are more used to working in those types of environments and handling those kinds of jobs and drilling anchors and dealing with existing slabs and existing steel conditions. We had to do the what was the HBO building at 1100 Avenue of the Americas, 42nd, 43rd, and 6th. In that building, once we started, ripping into the facade and seeing what the anchorage conditions were, it turns out that they were a lot different than what everybody thought, even though we had done some probes. So you never know what you're going to find in these types of things. So you need to try to convince your client to do as many probes as you can, bring you on as early as possible. Price is always going to be an issue, no matter what anybody says. But there's an expertise and a skill level that's required to do a reclad or an overclad that a lot of people just don't have. And if you try to experiment during that, and it's not just us, sometimes it's the structural people, sometimes it's miscellaneous steel. It could be a totally different trade. Maybe it's the demo guys. You have to have everybody really working in sync on one of these projects because it's dangerous work, especially if it's an occupied building. There's lots of pedestrian issues, and it's just something that requires a whole different level of skill, I think, to do that kind of work and pull it off well. So we try to bring those different experiences to the table and try to offer clients maybe a better way to build a mousetrap.
These are exceptional jobs. I mean, I worked on 5 Manhattan West, which you probably know that the zipper curtain wall with Brookfield, and there was the Kushner reclad 666 Fifth and Penn that you did. And these are, trophy type jobs where I look at it and I would imagine they're not looking at this from an energy saving standpoint. I think that's a benefit. They'll lower their operational costs, but ultimately they're taking on a project like this because they're trying to attract a certain type of tenant.
Sure.
So do you think this approach that you did is repeatable and you'll see more of it?
I do, and we are. And I think a lot of it is, first of all, they're not making any more land in Manhattan, right? So that's rule number one: location, location, location. So when you have a complex like Manhattan West, where they're going to build two, a 1,000-foot tower and a 900-foot tower and a 60-story residential building, and they got that other thing behind it, it needed to be redone, right? I mean, I think what Rex did was awesome. It was a really cool job. We did that job. We didn't get it. Can't do them all, but it really, somebody had a vision for that whole site and it fit with what they were doing. And I think while someone may say they don't do it because of the energy requirement, the tenant you're trying to get may insist that the building have a certain energy footprint. And they may not want to be in a building that doesn't offer the highest level of LEED certification or the most energy efficient, or doesn't reuse its rainwater and recycle everything that they can. So I think the facade design sometimes is enabled by the client or the tenant's request for a certain thing. The Google headquarters on the west side at 550 Washington, St. John's Terminal. Just a massive, massive project. We put every level of technology into that facade that was known. Triple glazed, operable panels, electrochromic glass, multiple low E's, oversized glass, laminated, acoustic products. I mean, just everything into that, because Google, who's the tenant, was driving that decision. And, while they were budget conscious, they were more forward thinking about the future and how they were going to get 15 and 20 years of great performance out of this facade. And they weren't going to sacrifice saving 5 cents to get something cheaper that was a little less expensive today, but would be obsolete 10 years from now. So those are the kinds of projects, and that was a design assist, and that was Cook Fox Architects, and we were in tight with those folks and really spent a lot of time with mock-ups and VMUs and testing and all kinds of things to make sure that what they wanted was achievable and then the best way to achieve it. And that was a real partnership with the construction manager, who was Turner, and the architect and that client, and the consultants. And our vendors really had to push themselves to the next level to be able to do that kind of job. And we're always looking for partners that are willing to push. They'll do internal testing. They'll buy new equipment. They'll push their lines a little further. They'll work with their vendors, whether it's a finisher or what have you, and try to make sure that we've got the right product to bring to the market and offer that client something that's tested, warrantable, and is going to be long lasting. And that type of, reclad or overclad or adaptive reuse is a huge thing. And I think going forward, there's probably going to be a lot more of that than there is ground up construction in the next 5 to 10 years, just because of where commercial developers are right now.
I want to end on this topic because I know you've spoken on this and you have younger offspring in the business. It's a kind of the topic that everybody talks about. How do you
Sure.
attract the next generation of people into this industry? And I think you have a long way ahead of you, even though you might say otherwise. And there's an opportunity to attract a lot of people. And I think you guys, the portfolio speaks for itself. You do exceptional work and you do a lot of repeat business, and it speaks to you and the company and the capabilities. But that we're talking about the exception here. And I think, how does the run-of-the-mill facade contractor, the curtain wall supplier, how do they spread the message about what they're doing? Where's the disconnect right now about your generation? And you can share, and it's very exciting I'm sure when you're with your wife or your cousins, or if any of your parents are alive, to drive around and show what you just did across Madison Square Garden. They must be
My
enamored.
wife tells me to close the sunroof. She's sick of me looking up.
She's sick of it. But in all honesty, like, why can't you get a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old excited about something like that?
It's a real challenge, and I think that you've hit on something that a lot of people in the industry are always talking about, and I talk about it all the time because I've got 3 sons who work here. They range from 24 to 28, and we tried to start them the same way that I started, working in the field during the summers and working in the warehouse and just seeing around the product and touching and feeling a building and being strapped into a harness and working out on the edge of a floor slab installing a unitized curtain wall. And now, assistant project manager and working their way up. Not a lot of people like that business. It's not enough tech oriented. It's not, you got to get up early. You're going to be dirty. You're going to be hot. You got to deal with, people that are, not as polished as you may like to deal with when you're coming out of a, 4-year college. But the folks that like to work with their hands and that really want to build things and that are interested in this, we actually attract quite a bit of talent. We always like to hire more engineers. So our engineering staff is getting younger. But we also have very experienced project managers, and we rely on them. And, they work into their, mid to late 60s, and they have a tremendous amount of knowledge in their brain that we need to figure out how to download to the younger people. So the younger people are typically more technologically savvy, and they adapt better to the use of technology in different project management programs and Revit and Rhino and AutoCAD and everything else, and Bluebeam, and they can mark up a set of drawings really fast, whereas I'm printing it out and coloring it in with a highlighter. It still works for me, but that's how they do it. So trying to bridge that gap is not easy. So for us, we have a lot of word of mouth. People see the kinds of jobs we do. If we're looking for people, we'll advertise and we'll show all these fancy buildings that, hey, you want to work on the next Museum of Natural History or whatever. But I think for the average company, I think you need to be able to offer young talent a reason to join your company. And it can't just be money, because you're never going to compete with like tech companies. But if someone's interested in building something, give them an apprentice program, give them an opportunity to climb the ladder, give them a chance you can work in the field, you can work in the shop, you can work in the office, you can rotate through different areas of your business and let them see what they best fit into. But for us, in the space that we occupy, we try to attract talent that is interested in working and striving to get to that next level. I think that, if we were in a commodity business or if we were a manufacturer, you would have a traditional apprenticeship program, and that would be easy to manage. And I'm not going to say they're textbook, but they're pretty standard programs. We don't have that. So everything we do is customized, and we're trying to figure out how do us older guys communicate with the younger people. And sometimes we'll just take them into the city and we'll bring them to a couple of different job sites. We'll expose them to things that they would never be exposed to otherwise, and they get excited by it. A few of them will get afraid of it and they'll go do something else. But, you try to flush that out as early as you can. So I think just creating those opportunities for people to learn, to advance, to do some interesting things and work on the coolest, latest, most highly publicized buildings is always going to be a draw. So New York is just the number one place to do that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. It does.
it's
And I
it's our
think,
perspective anyway.
yeah, and honestly, I think even finding ways to share the projects and the details and the process on various means of social media, assuming that the architects, the facade consultants, the designers have visibility on that. Because even so, there's a lot of people that start out in the design community and want to get
Sure.
their hands dirty, or vice versa.
I spent 10 years going to every facade conference that there was. I mean, Facade Tectonics, Facade Plus, FTI, just everything. And it was great because when those first got started, they were like the first place you could go and see, oh, what are they working on? And you could see whether it was your competitor or someone that you wanted to emulate, or a job you lost, or someone was presenting on such and such a job, or you wanted to see that architect or that facade consultant or that developer because they were working on some job in the future and you knew they were going to be there and you wanted to just get a little FaceTime with them. So you do that, and you do that enough times, and you realize what's out there, and you realize that you only know this much. There's so much more out there. And I think for us, that's always the driver. And sometimes we have to like stop ourselves to make sure that we're not going over and above what our capabilities are, or taking on too much work or whatever. Sometimes we're a victim of our own success, but for us,
Yeah.
we're fascinated with this type of thing. And we
Yep.
want to, I'm doing glass, I'm selling glass that's 58 feet long. It's crazy.
It's tremendous.
It's crazy.
It's tremendous. So
But it's exciting.
Jeff, I enjoyed the conversation. On an ending note, I know we have a lot of people listening here that are in the New York market. So if someone wants to go out and see your guys in action, or a project you're working on right now, what's your trophy project at the moment?
Oh, you put me on the spot. We're finishing up an incredible project at Delta Airlines at LaGuardia Airport. It's like 500,000 square feet. It's taken 4 or 5 years to finish. It's got a little bit of everything on it: electrochromics, big glass, custom curtain wall, metal panels, skylights, operable skylights. It's got everything. And so many people fly in and out of New York through LaGuardia. If you fly Delta, that's our work. It's amazing.
There you go. I didn't know that
check
was
it
you
out.
gues. So
That's us.
Maybe we'll do a video on it.
Yeah, that, and I would say go see the Richard Gilder Center at the American Museum of Natural History at 79th and Columbus. Phenomenal, beautiful job. Gene Gang did this concrete canyon structure that has these big curtain walls in it, and skylights and windows and curved glass and bird safe glass and a little bit of everything.
Awesome. Jeff, I appreciate you coming on. Had a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Always good to talk to you.
Talk soon.
All right. Have a great day.